Uh-oh, more Britons than ever think Brexit was a mistake. And that shows a survey by the British opinion research institute YouGov. Almost 60% of respondents think Britain's exit from the EU was the wrong decision. They say, for example, that Great Britain has not been as successful economically since Brexit as it was before. And more than half of the respondents would even vote for re-entry into the EU. Almost a third are against if they could vote today. 7 years after the Brexit referendum, the majority of Britons are apparently fed up. The economy is weak and inflation is high. Attempts to turn back the clock proved difficult, though. More than half of Britons would vote for Britain's return to the European Union in the event of a new referendum. This is the result of a recent survey by the British market research institute YouGov, as I said, and accordingly, 51% of those surveyed would vote for it. Compared to January 2021, when Great Britain left the EU after the 2020, after the Brexit referendum in 2016, this corresponds to an increase of 11 percentage points. The figures confirm the latest survey results from the Tony Blair Institute. Overall, the data shows how much the mood of the population has changed within 7 years. According to YouGov, around 57% of Brits said that the decision to leave the EU was wrong. And this is the highest value that the Opinion Research Institute has ever recorded in this survey. 1 in 5 British voters who were in favor of leaving the EU at the time now admit that their decision was wrong. Only 32% currently consider the decision to be correct. The advocates of leaving the EU had promised a lot for the domestic economy after Brexit. And 3 years after the final departure, however, the track record is meager. Rather than enjoy major financial benefits from detaching itself from Brussels, the kingdom is struggling with persistently high inflation and supply chain difficulties. And first the truck drivers were missing, then the eggs, then the tomatoes. Then the gas stations ran out of fuel. And Brexit restrictions for migrant workers repeatedly pushed the island to its breaking point. London was also unable to conclude agreements that would make up for the losses in trade with the EU. A promised lucrative trade agreement with the USA, for example, which the so-called Brexiteers had advertised, did not come about. And on the third anniversary of Brexit, the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the DIHK, summarized the outcome of the exit from the EU as an economic disaster for Great Britain and the EU. While Great Britain was Germany's third most important export market in 2016, the country slipped to 8th place in 22. And according to the state-owned company Germany Trade and Investor GTI, in 2023 the country would even fall out of the top 10 of Germany. So the trading partners, and that's for the first time in recent history. The inflation rate recently remained at 8.7%, although it's better now, I know that, which is the highest value among the large West industrialized countries. And the key interest rate has meanwhile been raised to 5%, which makes loans for investments and consumption more expensive and thus weighs on the economy. As a result of leaving the EU, many companies have postponed their investment plans in Great Britain. That was said by the chief economist of the Berenberg Bank, Holger Schmieding, recently on Deutschlandfunk. They are 25 to 30% lower than if the trend had continued from before Brexit. Less business investment means fewer machines in use and less productivity. And less productivity means higher costs for companies and higher prices for consumers. The EU as a whole is suffering from Putin inflation as a result of the Ukraine war. However, the high inflation in Great Britain also has something to do with Brexit. That's why it's still higher than in comparable countries in the EU. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative government, which insists that Brexit will bring benefits, is struggling to find solutions. A week ago, hours before an announced 5-day strike by teachers, police officers and doctors, Sunak relented and placated workers by promising pay rises for millions of public sector workers. It would have been the longest walkout in the history of the ailing National Health Service, the NHS, according to the British news agency PA. How the expenditure should be financed is controversial. Sunak announced that he would neither take on new debts nor increase taxes. Instead, the fees that people from other countries have to pay if they want to get a visa for the United Kingdom should be increased during a staff shortage. The Meat Processing Industry Association in Great Britain warns against such plans. The BMPA, that's the British Meat Processors Association, warned that higher visa fees in contribution to the country's health service would further exacerbate Britain's labour shortages and inflation. The hangover mood will remain with British citizens for the foreseeable future, and another referendum is not in sight. And the alleged great advantages of the sovereignty so conjured up do not exist either. So let's for a second talk about AstraZeneca. I didn't have the chance to talk about that yet. In February, AstraZeneca said it chose Ireland for a new manufacturing facility instead of Britain because of punitive tax rates. The British-based drug maker initially wanted to make a recent $335 million investment in the UK, but the tax rate was discouraging, as Chief Executive Pascal Soriot said in a briefing with journalists. You need an environment that gives you good returns and incentive to invest, he said. The comments are at odds with the British government's ambition to turn the UK into a life sciences superpower. And there were so many promises by the British government on that one again that you can't even believe that. But you have to think about AstraZeneca is just one small example. And you might have seen my video on the exit of a number of pharmaceutical companies from the payment scheme with the NHS because the government wants the companies to pay for the pandemic, and they are not quite happy about this. But the whole talk about from the Brexiteers and the Brexit campaign about the sovereignty and about getting rid of the shackles and the regulations of the EU, yeah, where's that all? I mean, a British company is investing hundreds of millions in Ireland instead of Britain because the situation in the EU is much better for them than in Britain. So, as we in Germany would say, find the mistake. And so I even can't understand that there are still 32% of people still believing that Brexit was a good decision. I mean, how stubborn do you have to be? I don't mean politicians. Those that still clinging to Brexit and their right-wing stance, and so they do it, of course, for power. That's absolutely understandable. Because we know why they are doing this. But the 32% of the population that still fall for this, they are the ones I still don't understand. But as the guy on LBC once said, he had compassion for those that were tricked into voting for Brexit. But he has no compassion anymore for those that are today still parroting this Brexit nonsense and still don't want to see the truth. And there he's quite right, because that is really something. I can understand people that have been tricked by this lie-filled campaign into voting for Brexit. I can even understand this, because a lot of people, it's the same everywhere on this planet, don't really inform themselves properly. That's kind of a habit everywhere. But now, after you see all the consequences, after you've seen everything, I don't understand why you can still believe that. But nevertheless, if you want to know more about Brexit or other UK politics, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.